Okay, good evening, everybody. It is now 7:30 p.m., so we will kick it off. Welcome to the AACE Australian Section's technical meeting for the 27th of July 2023. My name's Cameron Baker. I'm the Secretary of the AACE Australian Section. Okay, quick agenda. Okay, so for the meeting for tonight, Michael Wallace will be giving a presentation on quantitative risk in 36 minutes. We will have a question and answer session afterwards. So either feel free to type any questions in the chat during his presentation and we'll get to them afterwards, or ask the questions after the presentation's finished. Which will just run through. Okay. We make all of our webinar videos available on the AACE Australian Section YouTube channel. That should go up sometime on Sunday afternoon, Eastern Australian time. It'll also be converted to a podcast to go on the AACE Spotify channel. That usually takes about another week before we get it on there. Certificates of attendance will be distributed to AACE members only. So hopefully when you're registered, you check the little tick box if you are an AACE member, and we'll get them sent out to you. If not, just send us an email at the info@aacei.org.au email address, and we can organise those for you. And details of our future events can be found at our website at aacei.org.au. And we also post a mailing list and on LinkedIn. About AACE, we've been serving the total cost management community since 1956. The Australian section has been around in a couple of different forms since about 1979. We've been standalone by ourselves for the past 4 years. Committed to the constructive exchange of ideas between members, the development of technical guidance and quality education, recognition of subject matter experts. This is our current structure for 2023. Most of our board is located in Victoria at the moment. So if anybody who's a AACE Australian Section member and wants to give us a hand and lives outside of Victoria, it'd be greatly appreciated. Just get in contact with us via our info@aacei.org.au email address, and we'll get back in contact with you. Okay, please welcome Michael Wallace to present quantitative risk in 36 minutes. Hand it over to you, Michael.
Great, thanks, Cam. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, let me just try and get the technicalities worked out. One sec. Because I cannot. Because I can't see you, Cam. Oh, shit.
There's a share button highlighted.
Yeah, the screen's vanished, Cam. Sorry. It's going to be 20 to 37 minutes.
We need to have one of those technical problems type filler screens.
Yeah, bear with me a sec. Sorry, I had it up and it's just vanished. Okay, let's go back to here. One sec. Okay, have you got me?
We can see you.
We see you.
Okay,
Not,
you
not
can't
your
hear me
screen.
yet.
We can
Yeah,
hear,
can hear you.
just can't see it.
You can.
Just can't.
Okay,
Yeah.
let me just share the screen. Good. I got very worried. Okay, share.
It's okay. I can edit all this bit out.
That's fine. I'm trying to. Oops. Window. There it is. It's up the top. Sorry. Gotcha. Okay, you should be able to see my my screen now. Can you see it? Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
Great.
See.
Thank you. Okay, we got there. It's going to be 38 minutes. Okay, welcome everybody. So today I'm going to be talking to you about quantitative risk in 36 or 38 minutes. But before I start, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. So today's format, I guess that I'm going to be, it's difficult to put something together based upon not knowing the experience with the people who are going to be attending today's call. So it's a bit of it's got smatterings of sort of advanced and beginner sets of information, but I think that the principles are going to be pretty clear, and the tips and tricks are going to be in there as well. And I hope that you it's appreciated. So just a little bit about me and my career trajectory. On the right-hand side, started off as an engineer in oil and gas, moving into project engineering, construction management, project management, commissioning operations, transition, general management. And then I thought, what can I do with all that experience? How about to become a risk manager? And that's what I am. So I work for Aurecon, and I co-lead the South Australian Victoria risk department, and I'm also the subject matter expert around quantitative risk for the business. So I guess that, as I was mentioning earlier, in oil and gas, quant risk has been around for a long time. I was introduced to it back in the late 90s for oil and gas projects. It's become very much the benchmark now in large projects to follow this process. And so I'm just going to run through the agenda which I've got in front of me, and also if you can make sure that you can just confirm that you can see my screen. This is a point of view. This isn't something which is it has to be mandated. There's different ways which you can address quant risk. A lot of you have probably followed a certain practice in the past, but I just wanted to just clarify that, yeah, this is just simply a point of view. Whether it's a rabbit or a bird, it's up for you to decide. So before I got into the detail of quant risk, I just wanted to probably pick it up a couple of levels to the strategic level and just look at, I guess, investment planning and the process and how it relates to projects. So I thought it's going to be important to get an understanding of that first. So I guess that where it all starts in terms of the investment is around determining what the reasons for that investment, and to be able to do that, a tool like the investment logic map is adopted to be able to determine that. And with that, they establish the business establishes what the problem is to address, the benefits required to be able to address that problem, providing a response and a solution, which could take on a couple of different forms. It could take on new capability within the business or new assets. And that is for determining, in terms of what the capital is used for compliance, growth, strategic purposes, or just SIB, stay in business. So once the investment logic map is actually completed, and you've actually done a benefit cost ratio and determined that it's viable, the project to go ahead with, you're wanting to make sure that those benefits are going to actually yield the benefits. And to be able to do that, you put a benefits management plan together. Now, with the benefits management plan, you'll be looking at KPIs around that benefit, the measures used for determining how to measure that KPI, the baseline which you're going to be using for that, as well as setting your targets. Now, in government around benefits, it's not going to be always cost related. There is going to be a social element to it as well. So I thought that I'll bring this up mainly because there is opportunities within projects, especially the initial stages, where you may be able to increase the amount of benefit to a community or to the social element of an investment. So that's the reason for having this slide in here. Moving along to a business case modeling. And I thought that what I'd do is just be able to bring up a sample business case, which I've been working on, or which I have been working on in the past. And that relates to an energy project. So this energy project had a capital budget of $7 billion, and it was a 5-year build. And there was a dismantling and remediation cost of $1.25 billion with that. This is a bit of a chart just showing in terms of any adjustments around the capex and dismantling cost increase, as well as slippage in time, and how that relates to the actual IRR, or the internal rate of return for the investment. So I thought it'd be good just to be able to see, we all experience on big projects, blowouts are pretty common in terms of budget and schedule blowouts. But in terms of from a business perspective and from the investment, I thought it would be good to be able to just highlight the fact that, hey, even like at a 20% increase in capital cost, that is for a 50-year life of this design life for this asset, you're looking at it not being viable at 120%. And then you can even see with the with the MPV for 1 year slippage on 100% hitting your budget, actual gains aren't that great for the investment. So bearing that in mind, I guess that once the loco takes off and the project's commenced, it's very hard, in flight to be able to stop a project, and just being able to, I guess, spend the time to be able to do the correct planning and be able to, and that's the reason for today's messaging around using the AACE principles. We'll be able to at least be able to set a structured approach for you to expect to have good outcomes. And I just wanted to point out there, if it was easy, then everyone would be doing it. You can't get these benefits without taking risk. And it just says here, cost and time, critical decision making needs a structured approach. So the structured approach, which we're going to be explaining a little bit further on, is going to be around the AACE principles. Okay, so I've just taken a bit of a snapshot in front of me of what is in the recommended practices around AACE. And on the right-hand side, you've got a very nice graphic showing that in terms of the confidence and the accuracy, which is expected for different classes of estimate, you should be converging towards having higher accuracy and higher confidence by the time you get to a class 1 estimate. On the left-hand side and the bottom is an excerpt from one of the practices, which looks at a class 3 estimate, and it's quite good. I mean, it's quite thorough. It's got a lot of information within the recommended practices, and it's quite prescriptive as well. So you can see in here that it's got a expected accuracy typical range for class 3 estimates are -5 to -15 on the low side and +10, +20 on the high side. They've also shows that that this is usually the class which is used for budget authorization as well. So all the different classes have different different criteria, and I guess that what's important is that in principle, if you followed the guide in terms of what the accuracy and what the information which has to go into an estimate required to be able to achieve that level of confidence, then it's pretty self-explicit. Also up the top left, I think it was pretty interesting with regards to the systemic risks, and probably just whipping through these very quickly. Level of familiarity with the technology, unique remote nature, complexity of the project, all these as you go down the list, you've probably got experience with being able to see how each of them is unfolded and being able to affect a project and derail it. Moving on to the next slide. I was talking about estimate maturity, and within each industry, there's recommended practices which are available specifically for each industry. And what they do is they'll actually specify the deliverables required to be able to meet the requirement to be able to satisfy that class and the expected accuracy for that class. So you can see that you've got everything running through from detailed design to preliminaries at different class levels. So these are available across a range of industries, and you can link it back to the previous slide, which shows that at different classes you will get a higher level of accuracy and higher confidence. Okay, the accuracy expectations for each of the classes, you can see this is taken from the cost estimate classification matrix for building and, for building and general construction industries. It's got your ranging as expected range with the 80% confidence interval. I will talk about that later. And you look at each of the class and the maturity level of the definition of deliverables. So class 1, like 65 to 100, that's used to be known as bankable feasibilities, running at that range, at that level, which is generally you've got signed contracts in place, ready to go, and waiting for bank authorization for class 1. So the next is what I was just showing here in terms of this is a plus or minus. The plus or minus value represents typical variation at an 80% confidence interval of actual cost from the cost estimate. So this is I'll get to this when I look at a graphic a little bit later on to talk about that confidence interval. There is another set of criteria which is available, which is via the IPA, and they adopt the FEL system, which is a front-end loading system, as opposed to AACE. And if you hear that in conversation, it's a little bit different, but there are some similarities. So just if you can see here, for the project phase for a FEL 1, you're looking at a planning conceptual design, 2 is feasibility design, 3 is preliminary engineering, and 4 is detail engineering. So the difference is, though, as you can see, FEL starts with a 1 and ends with a 5. The equivalent of a 1 is an AACE class 5. So it can be very confusing when somebody's talking about a FEL2, that the equivalent for that is actually a class 4 in the AACE speak. And also down here, you can see it's quite interesting. You can see here the basis of estimate. The FEL1 is very much parametric model. So if you've got a lot of data and you've got parameters which you can modify to be able to provide a model, that is excellent for benchmarking on FEL1, FEL2, budgetary quotes, semi-detailed units of costs, unit costs, and the RFPs for key contracts for FEL3. Typically, budget approval is at a FEL3 or a class 3 estimate. And we'll just move along to the next slide. So I've just said here, this is pretty straightforward, structured approach, should yield good results. So do you think it does yield good results? Let's have a look at the data. And we can say project performance stats. This is compared to end of FEL3 with an 80% confidence interval. We're seeing that the target's plus or minus 10%. The actual cost rangings between that time, this is published in 2022. The cost ranging is typically between minus 17 and 42% overrun for cost. And also for schedule, we've got a -4 to a plus 55% schedule slippage. So that was published by our IPA in 2022. Other fun facts in statistics, I thought, which were quite interesting, is that 48% of respondents feel their organisation manages projects and programs effectively or very effectively. Now, this is a report published by AIPM and KPMG in 2020. I've deliberately went back to 2020 to get this data because of COVID. So that's quite low at 48%. 25% of projects delivered successfully at least most of the time. So that's pretty depressing. 52% of projects are delivered with stakeholder satisfaction. 51% of projects are likely to meet original goal or business intent. 42% of projects are likely to be delivered on time. 40% of projects are likely to be delivered on budget. So as you can see, with a beautifully structured process in place, which a lot of these projects would have had, and with the contingency built in, that it was still pretty, the outcomes were pretty bad. Next area which I was looking at is independent review and change management performance challenges. So this is taken from other pieces of information from that same survey, showing that does your organisation regularly undertake independent project performance reviews to assess performance of delivery? 59% said yes. Does your organisation include change management capability as part of the project establishment or undertake formal organisational change management activities during the project life cycle? 67% said yes, which is quite good. And 32%, this is quite an interesting one, of organisations with formal change management activities consider them to be very or extremely effective. So I thought these were really interesting statistics because we plan so hard, we spend so much money in the planning phase and trying to get it right. So the question is, why isn't it right? How come we're so far off the mark? And lastly, the value of the PMO. 57% of organisations use a centralised PMO to coordinate projects. 19% of the organisations have disestablished a centralised PMO in the past 2 years, and 37 organisations rate their centralised PMO ability to support and affect change as very or extremely effective. So again, these are pretty damning statistics. In terms of that, what the PMOs is being able to provide. You can see there's performance reporting, Centre of Excellence. However, there's a big problem with regards to being able to effectively implement change. So of those 25% successful projects, what do they do well? Engage with sponsors, 70 versus 61%. Formal benefits management practices in place, 85 v 78. Effective governance practices, 69 v 40, which is quite important. And then establish independent project performance reviews, 70 versus 59. So that's it with regards to the stats. So the first part was around there's plenty of structure within the AACE and the IPA practices. However, the statistics don't really put it in good light. So hopefully a little bit further down the track, we'll look at some of the principles and some of the practices which will be able to change that. This is just getting people familiar with regards to what would be considered the different modelling, which would be required at different gates within the government process. This is the UK. This is the UK model, and a lot of the UK. I'll just actually say that a lot of the information coming out of the UK Gov is extremely good, and it's I think a lot better than what's here in Australia. So the main purpose of this was to look at this, of course, the value influence, and being able to see through each of these gates as the expenditure is going up, the value influence goes down, and that was from that website. And with that as well, the reason why I brought that up is because here in Australia, on big projects, you got a gated process. The cost of change and the cost confidence, as that goes up, I guess the change appetite just diminishes to the point where the any sort of benefits or any opportunities which you initially put forward ends up being a greater cost to be able to implement. So they're usually shelved. And you can see down the bottom, through my experience, these are stats from my own personal projects with regards to the opportunities which have been registered, and then the conversion rate of those opportunities at the different stage gates. So you can see here it drops off very, very quickly, and you end up not really implementing any change which is going to provide any greater benefit to the project, and you've lost those opportunities. Another note, just in terms of a tip, some contractors know that, especially on an ECI process or early contractor involvement process, if there's a competitive ECI, some contractors know, and they game the system by including a lot of opportunities within their calculations around contingency, and then once that's actually, most of that's removed by the time it actually gets to delivery, and you end up spending a lot of extra money which you didn't initially plan for. Just from speaking from experience. Okay, next one is types of reasoning. There's three types of reasoning: inductive reasoning, which is the bottom-up approach. So you're looking at observing, looking for patterns, hypothesis, and theory. Deductive reasoning, which is starting with the theory and moving to the hypothesis, pattern, and the observation. And then last and not least is the abductive reasoning, which is inference to the best explanation, which is this one here, using, like, based upon your experience and growing your knowledge, developing hypothesis around that. So this is effectively using a little bit of most of what the experiential information is, and building that knowledge, and then quickly making that hypothesis and living with that hypothesis. So it's very quick decision making when you use that reasoning technique, which is abductive. Now, just with this one, in terms of reasoning, this is all coming up to, I guess, the way in which you range your risks and uncertainty. Just a tip here is avoid groupthink and discover through diversity. So the different opinions which you have coming through in your reasoning and your discussions, the better. Because sometimes doing it the same old way doesn't always work. And just in terms of, it's a case in point with the slides which I brought up earlier around the statistic. If somebody is trying to convince you that their way is the right way, 25% of those projects before were successful. So it's always good to be able to have a little bit of diversity within the team around that. Next thing I just wanted to quickly talk about was bias. So this is a really confusing slide. Got it from the internet. I love it. And I guess I've just tagged some of the things there around bias. A lot of people will say that they don't carry any bias. I just tagged a couple of there which I've actually had a lot of experience within workshops. And I guess that the main point of this is being able to, when you walk into and you facilitate a workshop, I think it's pretty important to be able to understand, I guess, people's credibility who are attending that workshop, as well as determining where, what the bias is sitting in that room. So this is probably just a good explanation about what the different types of bias are and what to look out for when you go into a workshop. Moving on to the modeling techniques. Now we're going to focus on one particular modeling technique today because of the time constraint, and it will be using Monte Carlo simulation for the analysis. There are different modeling techniques. The parametric, as we discussed earlier, that's effectively looking at particular parameters and either modifying those parameters according to complexity of the projects, and how it's changed from what the data is on previous projects, which you may be able to make alterations to be able to get a level of accuracy around the numbers around the budgets. Scenario-based modeling, there's an explanation up there around that. Method of moments, Monte Carlo, and if you ever see CRA, SRA, QRA, it's effectively cost risk analysis, scheduler risk analysis, and quantitative risk analysis. So probabilistic schedule analysis, I've put that in there. It's pretty similar to the SRA, but there are some critics out there who do not like Monte Carlo for some good reasons. And we said it before, and it says down here also, you can see that where it's explained, this is coming out of the AACE recommended practice. It says that it's the Monte Carlo is the most common method for late stages of project. It relies on complete data sets and assumptions, very sensitive to input data quality. Novel or complex projects may lack the required data maturity at the very early stages. So this method may provide false certainty and is not recommended. So yeah, you have to be very careful where you use this. And with regards to the modeling techniques as well, I'll go over that a little bit later in terms of tips. And there is another one there, combined parametric and expected value, which I can provide another explanation, or you can contact me directly and I can walk you through and provide some information around those other modeling techniques. The software, there's a range of software. I'll just put down a couple there. At Risk, Acumen Risk, Perp Master, Oracle, Primavera Cloud, and there's a lot of others. There's no silver bullet with these. They've all got issues. There's pros and cons with all of them. Some people I know are on the call, they actually use a few different pieces of software to be able to use the functions which are advantageous. They'll be able to work on that software, get the results, and they'll pump it straight into the competitive software package to be able to do another component to be able to provide better accuracy. or better functionality, I should say. Okay, so probabilistic distribution functions, as you may be aware, so with using Monte Carlo, it is the aggregation of a lot of data sets which follow a PDF, a probabilistic distribution function. So this is an excerpt from the recommended practice, AACE, and it just tells you where you should be using the different PDFs and what some of the advantages and disadvantages are with them. I'm not going to go through them all right now, but if you have a look through there, I'm going to bring up an example a little bit later, and I'll be able to provide a little bit of an explanation as to why I'd actually use that PDF. Okay, for those who don't know on the call, there may be some, I don't know, but discrete versus inherent risk. Discrete is event-based, so you may have it, or it may happen or may not happen on the project. Say, for instance, an earthquake could be, for instance, in high seismic activity areas, may be a discrete risk on the project, because it's either going to happen, which is going to be 100%, it's going to happen, or 0%, it's going to happen. Inherent, it's always going to be there, and that relates to the uncertainty. So you might say that, right, the commodity price of steel, that may fluctuate or vary. So you know that it's going to happen, but because of that uncertainty, you'll put a variance around that, and you may look at indexing on the steel market to be able to make your judgment around what that variance should be. The ranging of risks. This provides you here a bit of a sampler with regards to how some people may look at ranging. So usually the ranging takes a 3-point ranging around the for triangular or trigen distributions or functions, I should say. So with that, you can see here, there's on the left-hand side, you've got base estimate, risk, and anticipated final cost. And you can sort of see with your cost breakdown with land and property admin, indirects and directs, you do have some ranging there, the plus and minus. So with that uncertainty, because this is the base estimate, so you're looking at uncertainty and variance around what you'd expect in the marketplace around this, you'd be applying that to then determine what your point estimate would be and the ranging around that point estimate. Then, of course, you'd be using your discrete risks, which are on your risk register, and then you'd be looking at quantifying them and applying also a ranging around whether it's a 3-point for the trigen or triangular, or whether it's a uniform with the high and low around what the predicted values are going to be around the value. And then with that, it's effectively what you're doing there, aggregating that to be able to come up with an anticipated final cost. And that then looks at the pessimistic and the optimistic end of the budget and what the contingencies should be and the allowances for the project. So the ranging around this up here in terms of the uncertainty is around, it can be a range of things depending upon the project. It could be commodity based, activity subsets, equipment, and the source of estimates could be from market pricing database interpolation or parametric modeling or outputs. Okay, and the source for the discrete risks, as I said before, comes from the risk register. These are actually performed in a workshop environment where you'd be looking at the more notable uncertainty activities, and also from the risk register here, you'll be having that in a workshop environment with the relevant people who have the experience and knowledge to be able to contribute and provide a level of certainty or a level of confidence around what that ranging should be around each one of those risks. Now I've just had here is another tip, check ranging against AACE class accuracy tables, the basis of estimate and the basis of schedule. It's very important that the basis of estimate and basis of schedule is provided early on that sets the sort of tone for what sort of the level of accuracy you're going to end up at the end of your that end of that piece of work, whether it's going to be preliminary design or it's going to be detailed design. Having done and completed the information, this is quite common. I've seen in the past where engineers are flat out trying to develop MTOs, and by the time that the MTOs are completed and the schedule's updated, everyone's probably grinning right now. Then the risk people who do the quant work crunch for time, and there's not a lot of time to be able to provide the value which we can provide to projects, because we get the information way too late. So just encourage people to look at the basis of estimate and basis of schedule early on in the project. Monte Carlo, I'm just showing this as an example here of what a profile would look like on a Monte Carlo. Now, I'll just explain this table up the top here. The uncertainty or the risk is on the left-hand side. The ranging for that is in the middle, and then we've got a distribution profile, or a function, which is on the right-hand side. With people who don't know, the reason why I brought this up is because some people they're not aware of what a P10 is, or a P90, or a P50. So I thought I'd just probably go over this very quickly. I've just put in here, this is a 3-point range for what would be a triangular. So the triangular is a hard 1.2 to 1.4 in terms of the minimum and maximum, with the most likely being at the 1.3. And then you've got things like the uniform, where there's a lower range, which is the 6,000, and 8,000 is the upper range on that estimate for that risk. This is a distribution which I've created, which has 100 iterations. Generally, there's 10,000 iterations to a calculation to be able to give you the profile, which is not quite so jagged as a 100 iteration profile. So I'll just go to the next slide and show you. Oh, this is another one as well. Avoid gaming the results with altering distribution profiles. I have seen typically industry practices for TriGem, which is you don't constrain the ends like you do in a triangular function. You actually let 10% off on the optimistic side and 90% on the pessimistic side, and you let the Monte Carlo, which randomly selects numbers, to be able to venture past the 10% and 90% range. So I've seen people adjust these according to, you might not believe it, but they've adjusted these according to the likelihood which is set out in risk registers, which is a big no-no. So, to be able to change that to 20 and 70%, for instance, to be able to drive a wider range on the extents is not good practice. Okay, so just showing you here, this is just an example for people to try and understand this. It's hard without having the calculation up in front of me, so I thought I'd do it like this. Iterations, there's 4 iterations shown on the screen, and of those 4 iterations, I just wanted to show you the difference between the uncertainty and the discrete. The uncertainty, as I said before, is at 100%, so that's always going to happen, and it's always going to be in a range. So it randomly selects from that function, between the function which I showed you a minute ago for item number 1, which is a triangular distribution. You should expect that to be hitting between 1.2 and 1.4, with the most likely on a 1.3 with a triangular function. So it represents a triangle with the 1.2 to 1.4 with the most likely 1.3. So you can see here, this is hitting at 1.3. These are always going to get hits because they're all 100%. The discretes are a little bit different. The discrete is shown here as being at 20% of the time that discrete, the likelihood of this occurring, the discrete risk, is 20% of the time. So you're not always, in every iteration, you're going to get 0 in 80% of those iterations, you would end up having 0. And where it's going to be, you're having a number, it's going to be represent what's going to be as that function within the distribution function for that risk, which is assigned, which I showed you on the previous slide. So of that, what ends up happening is you simply take the aggregate. So 0.94 million is the aggregate of all those risks, right? And with that and with the base estimate, you'd end up graphing that and saying, right, 0.94 sits around on the right-hand side of the P10 or the P10. So the P10 is at 0.92 million. We're sitting at 0.94 million. So you're going to get one hit. So these represent hits. Each iteration is a hit, showing that 0.94 million is sitting on, and yes, what ends up happening, you go through the different iterations. The second iteration may be 1.05, then you put in a market around 1.05 million as a marker. Okay, so these are all random and they're generated for each iteration. So what happens is you get a build up of the number of the iterations will end up building up, and they will end up generating a profile which looks similar to this profile which you've got. Some will have longer tails for the larger risks, which have a lot of uncertainty around what the maximum or pessimistic ranging would be. However, what it ends up being, the P10, this is, so as you can see here, P10 does not represent that 10% of the risks are happening. All right, 10% simply means that the aggregate is hitting at 0.92 10% of the time. So 10% of the time you're hitting 0.92 million, which is the summation of everything in the P10 to the left-hand side. Right, so everything on to the P10 is being represents the 0.92 million, and similar thing with the P50 at the 1 million. Everything to the left-hand side hits on the P50, which means that all these iterations, the number of them, if you hit 100, you should find that the P50 will end up being there will be 50 tokens on the left-hand side here, if you like, which represent each of these iterations. And the P90 as well. That's a similar sort of thing with regards to 90% of the hits which are occurring are all hitting on the 1.23 million or less. So this is actually used for, if I wanted to have a P90 estimate, I can say that, okay, using the Monte Carlo method, using the Monte Carlo method, it's not necessary. It doesn't mean that 90% of the risks are actually going to occur. It just means that the number of hits, 90% of what has been aggregated, represents the P90 number. Okay, I'll just move on. I hope I haven't confused people. Correlations. So with regards to correlations are necessary because with Monte Carlo, you do get different hits within each of the functions, and in some activities or some commodities, you find there's going to be positive correlations. So instead of having what's an example? You might have things which go up at the same time, like some commodities go up at the same time as other commodities. So the price of steel might go up at the same time as the prices of concrete. So if you look at the historical indexing, you'll find that they both move up or they both move down together. So with that, you do not want the modeling to be able to be having one go up and the other one go down, because as I said before, it's random. So correlations will drive a behavior within each of those functions, so that they will go up at the same time, or they may go apart at the same time. Now, with that, there's an example here. I'll just throw here. So Zero, if you do not put in any correlations, it represents zero. So there are no correlations whatsoever. And at minus 0.75 as a correlation between 1, 2, as many as you want in terms of commodities or equipment, pieces of equipment or anything which you're going to be pricing up, you'll get 75% as a negative correlation. So that means that they're opposing each other. So 75% of the times that you get an iteration between those activities, 75%, they'll be going apart. Okay, they'll be moving apart. So it'll force the calculation to drive them apart 75% of the time. And same thing with the plus 0.75, which represents 75% positive correlation. So you'll find that you know, if you want to go to extreme, which I didn't put in here, but I probably should have, like a one represents 100% correlation. So as I said before, you might find that concrete and steel go up at the same, at the indexes are exactly the same. They go up and they go down together, in which case you'd put a correlation of 1 to drive that behavior within the model. Influence mapping. So influence mapping is really good. It's used to group costs and activity durations within a cost and work breakdown structure. So it can be very quick, and it's good for actually documenting the thought which has gone into collecting these different activities. The CBS and WBS mapping is essential to managing contingency. So there is we really need to establish the relationship between the cost breakdown structure and the work breakdown structure, get the mapping right so that it's going to be a lot easier to be able to determine once you're impacted by an uncertainty or by a risk, a discrete risk, that you know what it's going to be impacting in terms of the way in which the WBS is structured or the CBS. So there should be linkages between those two, the CBS and the WBS, to be able to, for that transparency throughout the project. When to group and when not to use correlations. I'm just saying here that influence mapping is really good. It's really good for building the team and getting a common understanding across the team in terms of what's affecting the pricing. And I'll just send here, it can represent positive and negative correlations, and formally document that within the basis of the modeling of the quant report, which is delivered as a deliverable. Okay, moving on. Rates and productivity factors. This is just thrown in there. So the estimator is to include the basis for high and low ranging. So the basis for rates will be around EBAs. Productivity factors will be around what industry PFs are, or for, you know, it's going to take so much time to be able to pour so many cubic meters of concrete. There are industry benchmarks out there around that in terms of productivity for a particular site and for a particular crew or contractor or subcontractor. You can use that, put that into your estimate to be able to establish the range, and then using that range which you've got in the estimate as an output, you can establish what the upper and the lower limits are, or the upper and lower bounds for your optimistic and pessimistic, and then you can apply a probability for that and run it through the Monte Carlo. Schedule risk analysis. We've got in here, this is a really dumbed down version of a Gantt chart. Now, with regards to the schedule risk analysis, you should be focusing on what's called the near critical influence zone. Now, within that zone, it depends on the project. It depends on how, you know, it depends upon also the work breakdown structure. But what you should be doing is saying, right, well, if there is some slippage within the project and you end up having new critical paths or multiple critical paths occurring, you wanted to be identifying that, and the only way you can do that really is to be able to start ranging the activities which are going to be falling into that category. So it's good to establish that. Some people put in like a near critical path of up to 1 month from the critical path. They'll go back 1 month to be able to identify all those activities, and they'll range all those activities, run the calculation, and then just see what the impact is on the overall program. What to do, so these are what's normally done: resource leveling, removing constraints, mapping the risk, reviewing the criticality index, which is effectively looking at all the activities around where that critical path is, and the near critical paths, and for each of the discrete risks and the uncertainty around it is sometimes the criticality index will show how many times that activity has moved into that critical path and how many times it's come back. So you can see it moving backwards and forwards around with using that index. We've also got sensitivity review and making any changes you need to the schedule. So that's where the value add is within here, looking at the sensitivities and then being able to speak with the planner, speak with the project team, and find out if there's an alternative way of working and affecting the work breakdown. And after that, producing the mitigated schedule, which is applying the amount of float into the initial schedule to be able to accommodate any sort of uncertainty or the discrete risks impacting the project, and formulating those response plans for the risks which are possibly going to happen throughout the project. What not to do: don't include padding within the project schedule. Don't include contingency activities within the schedule. And in terms of embedding unrelated projects, you could have 3 or 4 projects essentially in the one program, which you do have problems, especially if you are looking at not doing that program in its entirety, which means that you could actually have slippage, large slippage within each one of those subset projects, which go undetected when you run the analysis. Project cost and schedule distribution. This is just a profile which has come straight out of at risk. This is similar to what can be seen within. So you can see on the right hand side here, you can see it the different size. So 99% is 1.28 billion, and then you're getting a P50. So this 50% represents the P50 at 1.252 billion. And then up here you've got different. It gives you all the data on the right hand side for what that distribution represents. Okay, the value in billions, and you can see here. So on the right hand side, you've got the tornado, which shows you what the sensitivity is. This is coming out of Acumen Risk, which shows you for at a P50, it tells you that there is 195 days slippage on the project expected at a P50. So that'll be for a specific milestone. So within the SRA, which is the schedule risk analysis, and the CRA, which is the cost risk analysis, you'll get similar profile, or you get similar calculations which show a project distribution at different confidence at different levels of confidence around your p-values. Don't know how I'm doing for time. I'm trying to go quickly. Combined cost and schedule profile. This is an alternative to the joint confidence level, which I'm not going to talk about today. Effectively, the JCL is taking both. It's a resource loaded schedule and being able to present you with a more accurate representation around the risk as it applies to the schedule at different situations, at different confidence levels. This is like an alternative to the JCL, which is effectively overlaying what you're receiving for each of the CRA on top of the SRA. So you can see this is for a P95 of 2 billion. you can see here that the distribution and the makeup of the contingency. On the right hand side, you've got a contingency going up to 0.4 billion. So you've got, you know, the different color, different gradations for each band of contingency for the project. So you can see the largest one is the discrete risks on the project, which is in that mauve color, or sorry, the dark blue color. The sum of cost uncertainty, which is in that magenta color. So that just gives you a bit of a sense of what the scale is between each of the contingency on the project. Okay, so setting up for success on the project. This is what is. So earlier we spoke about, you know, 25% of projects being successful. A lot of the time we work to an unmitigated schedule. We develop the plan, we present the plan, and in terms of being able to lock in a particular mitigated schedule, it's generally kept as the baseline for the project. So what good experience or good practice is to be able to work with contractors. Contractors will generally run, and they like running a P75 mitigated schedule to be able to force in float and to be able to de-risk the project. But you'll find that usually is more prevalent on projects where you've got an alliance, or where you've got like a you know, a sole source contract, which is a target cost contract. So they're the practice which happens at the P75. What can happen if you do have competitive tenders, you will actually have probably a lot more exclusions or qualifications within contracts, and them being able to have an aggressive schedule, which is advantageous for the client, and then you look for variations to be able to de-risk the project as you progress through it. So just with regards to this, I'll just note it again. You can actually run your P90 and P50 and as a client, and being able to gauge with the management reserve, which is between your P50 and your P90, and what your contingency is, which is up to the P50. You can run a set of curves, different curves, which is this. Like this is an S curve, which is showing, which is a project performance curve. You can actually have the banding, so that you can actually determine as you progress through the project what your exposure is as you're, you know, as you're completing the project. The tip here, WBS and CBS mapping is essential for success. You need to know where those risks lie within the project. It's no good setting it up and having just a bucket of money. You need all that risk money, which is put into the contingency, has an allocation. So it's just simply a case of good management to be able to have that WBS and CBS matching up with the contingency. And that's so. And also with regards to the cost and the schedule, I've just got that diagram there. You will have to run through your CRA. You will have to run through your SRA. And you will have to bring the costs or bring the time from an SRA back into the CRA to be able to get the budget, the revised budget, and the projected costs. It's for your forecasting. Okay, so what I've got in here is in terms of QRA reassessment gates. So good practice is to be able to reassess the project as it progresses. That's good practice. And also with regards to considering having an independent gate assurance program in place as well. So that's beneficial, because a lot of the time when people are on projects for a long time, the bias is sort of dialed right up, and they're not looking for they fail to see what sometimes is obvious to other people but not obvious to them. Okay, just in summary, just quality rather than quantity. So use AACE recommended practices to standardize the approach to quantitative risk, align the WBS and CBS and contractor returnable schedules and reporting to improve database quality and contingency characteristics. So in terms of, I was on a project a number of years ago, and the time which it took for the estimate to get put together and the time which we went to getting planning approvals on that project was 2 years. So it was no surprise that a lot of the estimate was outdated, and a lot of the market pressures had sort of occurred by that time, and there was less sort of tier ones to be able to do the work essentially. Filter the bias through an independent review. This is again talking to that gated assurance process, getting some independence. We showed the statistically that those with independent review had higher levels of success in that 25%, and periodically reassess the risk to avoid set and forget policy, where the contingency is simply an unallocated funds. Use the QRA to de-risk the project. Late MTOs and minimal market data reduces the value in de-risking the project. Avoid making the data fit the class accuracy confidence interval requirement. So this is speaking to, right, well, just because the class accuracy says to be able to be fitting into that class, you have to achieve a certain accuracy. You shouldn't be trying to modify the data to be able to make it fit into that. So there's a lot of that practice which happens in industry as well, which I've experienced. And yeah, in terms of using that, like being able to engage the quant risk people early on in the project, or throughout the project to be able to reassess the contingency, they can add a lot of value, and they can get effectively de-risk and being able to determine where those sensitivities are, because a lot of those risks which I was talking about, they happen at various stages throughout the project. So you may find that even if you've missed the bullet for a couple of impacts on the discrete risks, it may open up an opportunity to be able to make some changes within the program to further de-risk the project at minimal cost. Another thing to probably add on to that, you've heard of crash in the schedule. I didn't make that reference before, but having a look at the business case earlier, you could see that a 20% overrun for a $5 billion project, or sorry, $7 billion project, was going to have big impacts if it was slipping by 1 year. You know, a small sum of money would be, you know, $100 million to be able to crash the project, to be able to avoid and be able to have that from being a project which may not be going ahead to something which is going to be going ahead. And last of all, greater substantiation of risk value. Generally, the ranging determined on discrete risks have limited inquiry and typically escalated to project director discretion. So a lot of the project directors do have a lot of knowledge. That's why they're there. They've gone through and they've had those experiences. But in terms of substantiating a lot of the estimates, and the 3-point estimates which are provided around the discrete risks, I'm just encouraging greater inquiry, and that the basis can be provided to support a response plan. And that concludes the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Now go to questions. John, you've got your hand up. Unmute yourself.
Hey, Mike, thank you for a great presentation, mate. That was very good. Just probably, I'd like to add to that, and you've mentioned sort of in passing, I think, you know, parametric models, and, you know, I like to use John Holman's AAC Life Members Product Valid Risk, and I'm not pushing that, but I think one of the things, and Alberto's mentioned it in passing in the comments, you know, I've built many models over many years, and I've come to the conclusion that it's not really about, you know, inherent and discrete risks. It really is about scope, and the more you can push down that sort of estimate curve, the better. And what I like what John's done in his valid risk model, and the IPA have now followed him, is they've started to build on the AACE guidelines to those class estimates for various aspects of a project. And I think they can be quite particular to an organisation. And I think trying to align what those deliverables are for class against your fell gates would be a massive improvement in any company to make sure they got better results. So it's not for me a focus on risk anymore. It's a focus on deliverables and what they are. And John's very good in his model. He started to sort of pull that out and, dictate, what it does mean to have good, for instance, good hydrology or good, geotech. What does that look like at a class 5, a class 4, a class 3? And then obviously realizing there's no benefit from a class 3 to a class 2, you never gain any more sort of, contingency. So I just like that point for me is great presentation. I love the modeling. I believe now when you do models, you shouldn't just use the one model. You should use, a parametric. You should use a Monte, and you should also use a lot of bent Flyberg stuff, and use the reference class forecasting as well. So you're getting a vision of what potentially, the outcomes should be. And I think Monte's got a bad reputation over the years from the Grattan Institute with, you look at a lot of the big infrastructure projects, and they published a paper in 2016 where they showed a lot of projects at about 6 to 10% on the P52 P90 differential, and they're advocating about 26%. You read some of, John Holman's stuff, I'm working on transmission lines at the moment, and he's out there around 50, 60%. You know what I mean, between P50, P90. So we do tend to get a lot of Montes done that are far too narrow, but I'll pull up sticks to Alberto's just turned up. So
but I think there's another part to that as well, and that is that a lot of the, like, I sort of support AACE. However, within each project and within each location around the world, and what those market forces are in terms of capability, in terms of us building an LNG plant, and being able to blow budgets like there's no tomorrow, the actual criteria which is set out within the AACE may not work here, but it may work in sort of Europe, for instance, where you've got such big projects and there's a lot of them. There's a lot of learnings. There's capability. There's a lot more capability in what's here. So I sort of, that's a challenge which I've got for people who want to follow it to the letter with regards to that accuracy. I don't think you should be doing that. I think that the guideline around what the information to be able to inform that accuracy should be, I think that's not too bad. But yeah, in terms of the capability and being able to, and I'm going to have this experience also on level crossings, right? So level removal crossings, initially there were big blowouts on them, but after 4 or 5 of them, they ended up getting more predictable. The capability came up within the industry, and they were able to deliver on time, on budget.
Yeah.
But I agree with you in terms of different models. I think that you should be definitely looking at the difference between them, and you should be challenging them. So I'm a big advocate for that.
And I think that's a good point, John. And I think that we talk about this many times when we work together. That it's really just about, it's not about the p-value that you select, whether it's a P10 or P90. It's just about the level of design maturity and scope maturity that you have at the time that you run the ASRA. So there is no point for me just to go with a final investment decision package, based on a master plan design, what's a concept design. And especially if you run an SRA and you get a very narrow, range between the P10 and P90, I will tell you straight away that's wrong, So and the problem is when somebody comes and say we select the P90, so we should be safe. It doesn't tell me anything.
No.
So this the misuse of terminology.
But don't you lose the point though. I think the focus on, I'm sorry, I call them wags and swags, wild ass guesses, and sensible wild ass guesses. That's how I call them these days. When you're guessing at numbers, which you are, so it's not about numbers, it's about narrative. So you got to get the narrative before you get the number, and there's ways of doing that. But I just really do think the focus should be to try and get those deliverables for the class right, and force them through the gate so that you know
100%.
you've got good quality design that's done, measured to a standard, and then you're driving yourself down that. Look at that curve, pull that curve up. The more you drive into that curve, that first slide you had, Michael, you're getting rid of risk. Look at those numbers tumble. They tumble far quicker than they do with discrete risk. You know what I mean? So it's trying to drive down scalp. You know, for me. So
yeah.
Yep.
And I guess you can take the the AACE guideline, and you can adapt this to your own organization, case assurance, and the way that you approve projects.
It's just unfortunate, though, Alberto, a little bit. And I've looked at a lot of those. A lot of them are very similar. You know, the numbers are very similar. Not many of them change. And even John's produced a couple of papers where, especially I'm in the transmission area at the moment, on a lot of these renewable energy zones. And the papers out of Canada and the US far out below those outer limits of the P90s and the P10s. You know, so they are only guidelines, you know, and, you know, that's where it could be, you know, some of the history, when you look at the, you know, the empirical data, it's a lot worse than that, you know, and what I find is clients tend to want to stick around that 6 to 10% differential because they're happy with that. But as you say, it's strategic misrepresentation. It's a lie to get a project across, a project over the line. So it's about trying to anchor bias at the right end first before you show that Monte result to say, hey, this is what reference class forecasting is saying. This is what parametrics saying. This is what a Monte is saying. A Monte is good for me in really scrubbing your estimate and scrubbing your schedule so you understand it in greater detail. Because even though Michael said it before, a lot of people have not got the base of estimate or base of schedule ready. You're normally behind the 8 ball. You don't have that. You know what I mean? They've spent months building an estimate. You get a week to try and build a model. You know, it's ridiculous. Like, you know, so you don't normally have that. You know, that's a luxury. So I think it's good to try and build a parametric and get that in there that broadens it, because you're going to struggle with optimism bias and all those things that you've mentioned, really. So I'm a great fan of John's model. Valid risk, people go and buy it. I'm not pushing it. I'm not on a commission. I just think it's a great model. So, and he's a lifelong member, you know, AAC through and through, you know. So
no, it's good. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody?
There's no such thing as a stupid question.
Right.
Snap.
Here we go. Here we go, John. Hey.
No, if there are no further questions tonight, I think we'll call it quits.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I did put in that first slide. It's going to be, the video is going to be uploaded onto the AACE website, and I did put that, what do you call that thing which you can take a photo of and it links you to your LinkedIn page, or you can find on LinkedIn. If you want to have a chat about it, I'm happy to have any offline discussions for any questions or anything like that. Thanks, Cam.
Okay, thanks, Mike. That was a very interesting session. Oh, here we go. Frank, question just appeared on me. I'll find it. How do you think AI will affect the risk analysis on projects?
Oh, good question. One of my buddies runs a company called that does this, and it essentially uses historical project data report or project reports, financial reports, to be able to then model up in the AI. So it's already happening. He's been in business for the last sort of, I think, 10 years, developing that. And I think it's just another one of those things that, it's another tool. I mean, projects are unique. You know, I think that depending upon the people who are actually on that project as well. You know, I can't stop thinking about, years ago, I saw a documentary on the a construction crew who just installed peaking power plant all over the world. And the team had been together for 20 years. And they had everything down to it. Nothing was a surprise to these guys. And that was sort of like, that's the difference between somebody like a capability, which is sort of at 100%, compared to somebody who, you know, wants to create LNG industry within Australia, and then has massive blowouts. So in terms of the AI quality of the data going in to feed that AI, that would be sort of interesting to see, given how different each of these big projects are. I mean, there's different projects happening now, and I think that data changes all the time as that capability comes up. And look at the solar industry. Initially, that was like there was a bit of margin in that industry in terms of construction, but then it got tighter and tighter and tighter and squeezed out one of the big tier ones that fell over because of that. But now they've actually, the capabilities there. They've been able to develop that over time, so the predictability and the confidence is going to be a lot higher, isn't it? So those models for the AI, I'll be very interested to see how that relates to a more mature industry as it develops that capability.
And I think, Mike, that's a good point. I think that we talked about this last week when we have our meeting about AI. I say it is good, but as you say before, it should be a tool, not an answer.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, and because I can tell you hundreds of different external factors that could impact your schedule. If you decide to build something, next year or in 4 years when there are more projects in the market, how is going to be the weather. So there's so many factors that can impact your project, that you never know. Even if you have a small project and you can find, to attract, the tier 1 contractors, with tier 3 contractors, and then you have the productivity that you didn't expect, so there are so many factors. I remember just doing a project in China, many years ago for a pharmaceutical that, we didn't expect the impact from the Olympics, and we couldn't even buy steel in China. We had to bring steel from Thailand for a project in China. So it's just because we couldn't find subcontractors, we couldn't find suppliers, So there are so many factors that if you use AI for a project like this, you will be 100% wrong.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add to that is I always talk about the 4 A's of risk management, and number 1 is awareness, and the process that you just outlined, Michael, takes you through a process of making people aware of what their uncertainties are, and you always have those subliminal thoughts that people manage it post the workshop. It's not about the output, it's about the awareness raising, and just the theory of AI is how are you getting that knowledge into the team to understand what the risks are, who they eventually they own it, and they think it through, and then they make it work. So I think you're missing a vital step of awareness from the 4 A's. So and if you're not doing that, you're just missing that. So how are you gonna manage it?
Yeah, John, I couldn't agree more with you. And I had this conversation with some guys, in Adelaide a few weeks ago about this. And I said, look, I'm not looking at contingency estimate. I'm looking at contingency planning. So I need to understand, where the contingency is coming from. So if I don't know, where the contingency is coming from, I'm going to use the contingency in the first month of the project. And you're going to be late anyway. So I fully agree with you, mate. You're missing one step if you go straight with this sort of technology. But that's just me. Maybe I'm getting old.
Well, yeah, me too, Alberto.
and hopefully the AI models get over this nasty habit they've got of getting dumber over time, as we're currently seeing with ChatGPT. Apparently, it's actually getting worse as it gains more information. So, and it seems to be a problem with the model, not the information it's got access to. So we'll just have to, I think that'll be a watch this space over the next couple of years and see what actually happens. But I agree, it's a great tool so long as it works. But I'd say there's another vowel that needs to go in the whole process, and that's understanding. You've got to make sure that your team understands their project. Because as Mike said, one of the tier 1 contractors who fell over in the solar industry. Yeah, I was involved in part of that on the client side. So, and the biggest failing on them was lack of understanding. So, in that the site management team had not a single one of them had read the contract.
Yeah,
they didn't understand where their practical completion milestones were or anything. So, yes, understanding is the number 1 point to start from.
Yeah. And I think what people will argue. I think it's a good point you made before, Michael, when you talked about the schedule, and people are using Safran and things. I'm very old. I use sort of a PERT master And I think the point I was going to make in the commentary is that very often I've been all around the world building models, and I'll get into a room and I'll build a summary schedule, firstly taking the scheduler to task when he's got half his links missing, and he's got connections to summary schedules, and he's got, you know, finish to finishes and all sorts going on. If you don't run those checks to see that you've got a decent schedule first and then build a summary schedule, I've actually been in rooms with big billion-dollar projects, put the summary schedule up and go, oh, I didn't realize that was a critical path. You know, so you actually build an awareness in a team of potentially what they're actually driving by doing that methodology you just pointed out before. It's a powerful thing that you just said before, just to get people to because you got to think about it. Project managers are just getting a printout.
Yep.
They don't understand the logic behind it sometimes. So I think getting in there and actually sort of making sure the logic's right and then summarizing it to, you know, critical and near critical, you're suddenly building that awareness again where they've got to focus. So I think the point you made before was an excellent point that you made, you know.
And John, I think that you need to go even one step before that. It's just to ensure that the schedule reflects the project scope and the strategy.
Correct.
So you know, I have seen projects, you know, when in reviews, when they say, this is a two stages contract, which is very clear that you are not allowed to procure anything until you get the GMP approved. And then you have procurement of structural steel, procurement of long-lead items, and you can't do that. You know, you don't have the GMP approved by the client. So how the hell are you going to procure all these materials? You know, or you have cash flow constraints, or how are you going to spend all this money? You know, so it's also about the schedule need to reflect the, you know, the project scope, the strategy, the contract type, and all the constraints that you have.
Yeah. Oh, good point, Alberto.
Yeah. So it's
all right. It's getting late. Thank you, guys. That was a great discussion.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Mike. Very good, mate. Thank you, John. Nice to see you, mate.
Yeah, nice to see you.
Yeah.
And thank you to everybody who stuck around for the discussion. Okay, reminder, this will be posted on our YouTube channel as soon as I get it edited. So hopefully by Sunday evening, it'll be there. It'll be converted into a podcast in roughly a week's time. And on our Spotify channel, you can find us at aacei.org.au or on LinkedIn. So thank you, guys. And hopefully we'll see you at the presentation next month, which will be presented by Alberto.
Thanks again. Bye.
Okay.
See you guys. Take care.
You.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Thank you, Mike.
Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks all.